life. There was never a moment, no matter how rough the side of the mountain was, that we didn't stand up. And especially our women. So we want to thank you so much for bringing that into our space. So we're gonna get started now, and I'm gonna ask that Kassandra Frederique make her way to the stage. Just let you know a couple of things. Number one, it was interesting. I was talking with Susan Burton, a dear friend of mine and a partner, the other day about some of this stuff, and I just started to cry, right? This is real stuff, and I realize that people do get triggered while we're here, and I want to acknowledge the Columbia students from the School of Social Work who are here, if you can see by raising your hands, who are here to support anybody who does get triggered. I want to also acknowledge the team who are here from the Urban Survivors Union, Shiloh Murphy, and the team of people led by Terrell Jones, who is here from the New York Harm Reduction Educators, because if anybody overdoses, you will not die on our watch. We have the lasso here, and you will be treated. Stand up so we can see you. You'll be able to recognize you and a GPA button. I also want to acknowledge that there was a group of people who have joined us today during this international week. We have brothers and sisters from Brazil who are just really seeing how much drug policy is race policy. They were taught that by reading Dr. Hart's book, High Price, and they have joined us today. And so our friends from Brazil, let us see you. Welcome. And with that said, let me ask my incredible colleague, Kassandra Frederique, who's the other person who stepped in and who always comes when she is called. She was actually going away because Kassandra turned 30 yesterday. She was trying to chip on me, but she was like, if you need me, I'm going to be here. And so she helped me think through all aspects of the program. She did so much of the outreach. And now she is going to moderate the panel that's going to frame this entire day. And so, Kassandra, I'm going to let you say more about that and talk about NICO and also the laws for the state of New York so people know them. Kassandra Frederique. Also, I'm new director of the New York Policy Office. That's what I look like.
So, good morning. So again, my name is Kassandra Frederique. I am the New York State Director at Drug Policy Alliance. So we want to thank you so much for coming to our home stage. I also want to give a very big shout out to the New York funded partners that are in the room, especially the ones that are not from New York City, because it's really important to know that our state is very large. So there are other places outside of New York City, so I want to give a special shout out to Albany, New York, that's in the room. I'm going to give a very, very, very special shout out to Ithaca, New York. So those are my two shout outs. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming to New York. It is amazing to be having this conversation right now, talking about race policy. AKA the drug war. It's been so instrumental. It's been one of the most effective ways to criminalize communities of color. It has been one of the most effective ways to get us to dislike each other. Right? And so it's really important to know that in New York, we set the framework of how to operationalize the war on drugs. We did that because our governor at the time, Nelson Rockefeller, created the Rockefeller drug laws, which created which created the mandatory minimums for drug possession. And we've reformed a lot of those laws, but a lot of those things are still on the books. We have lost so many communities, we've lost so many families, and we have always resisted. Because of people in this room, people like Jazz, room, we have fought back incredibly. In New York, we worked with moms in Long Island, we worked with moms in New York City to pass Good Samaritan laws, which basically said, created medical amnesty for people. If you're having a hard time, and you're partying, having a good time, and even if you're under 21, we believe that saving your life is paramount to any kind of punishment that we could do. We did that with people in this room. In New York, everyone knows that marijuana as capital of the world is our great distinction. And people, yes, thanks for that. I like the history. You can have up to 25 grams. Possessing 25 grams is not a criminal offense. However, because drug policy is race policy, we know that 86% of the arrests are Black and Latino. And we know even more that it's so insidious that they come for our young. 70% of the arrests are under the age of 30. 52% of the arrests are between the ages of 16 and 22. It is on purpose, it is intentional, it is not coincidental. However, because of people in this room, we have dropped marijuana arrests to levels of 1996. The people in this because of people in this room, you can get naloxone over the counter at a pharmacy. Because the people in this room, syringes have been decriminalized, and we're going to keep working so that they can be fully decriminalized. Because the people in this room, right? Because the people that are using drugs telling us this is what we need from y'all. All this money that y'all have, right? I know some of y'all rolling your eyes, GPA average, as up in Columbia University, all that stuff. How do we leverage resources intentionally? How do we build with people that know what's right? This is more than theoretical. This is our everyday lives and changing the idea of who is the expert. The people that are the experts are the people that are living their lives every day. And so it's really, really exciting to welcome you here. To hear amazing stuff in New York, because I am from New York, so I think we're the best. And I love New Orleans too, shout out. We're here to change lives, we're here to save lives. And the only way we can do it is if we're intentional, strategic, and put it out all on the table, which is why I would like to introduce and bring up to the stage Ithaca Mayor, Svante Myrick. Who's been doing exceptional work with the district attorney, Gwen Wilkinson, and Lillian Fan, assistant director at staff. And secondly, I just want to bring up to the stage again, one of my favorite mentors, Dr. Carl Hart.
Good morning, gentlemen. So we just want to start off today. We're going to frame out the larger conversation of today, set the tone. And so you have a tall order to be really smart, pithy, and on point. So I'm going to start off by just asking you to talk about, your experience, how you've come into this space, why you think it's really important to talk about drug policy as race policy, and what you think the goal of this is. Like, what is the goal of ending the drug war? And is the goal ending the drug war?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. And I just need to say, I don't know if any of you have heard about the news we've made in Ithaca in the last month. That's thanks in no small part. So I've always been interested in drug policy. My mother explained to me when I was 4 years old why we had to leave my father. We were kicked out of the homeless shelter where we were staying, or where my mother was working, because my father got out of jail and moved in with us, which was against the regulations of the shelter. So she explained there's this thing, crack. Your father is into it, and it's very powerful, and it's got an effect on him, but also there's a system, a set of rules and regulations, and somebody makes those rules. And this is how those rules are affecting us now. So it split my family apart, and I ended up, I went to Cornell in Ithaca, and I never left. I got elected to the city council when I was a junior there. And I got elected mayor when I was 24. And thank you. And I found myself at the head of a system that I knew was failing, and I was not doing anything about it. So I got connected to the Drug Policy Alliance, spoke at a conference, watched a film featuring Dr. Carl Hart, and got inspired and said, what would happen if a municipality, if a city, tried to create its own end to the drug war? What would it look like? And I've got to be honest with you, our first attempt, I got 45 people together, experts, what I thought were experts. We had a chair who had been working in the treatment field for a long time. We did that for about 9 months, and it wasn't working. It wasn't working. So I did what I've come to find out is always smart. I listened to Kassandra. And we asked Gwen and Lillian to take over the process midstream. And a thing I found out as mayor, which I did not know before, I found it out through this process and through a couple other things that have happened, is that good things happen when women are in power. And I really... No, I have to confess, and we all have blind spots, and this was I did not know that I did not know that. But I have learned that because they actually truly listen to each other, if you can imagine, and they build trust, and we expanded who we were talking to, and we talked to people who were actually using, and we talked to people who were recovering, and we talked to law enforcement officers. One of the things that stunned me, and I'll just put it out there, our drug policy is, of course, racist and racially based. We know that. I thought before I became the mayor that was in large part because our police officers were inherently racist. And I was surprised to find out that our officers, the vast majority of them, are not. But they are asked every day to carry out racist policies. So they would tell us, they would say, you want to stop having bad interactions, us to stop having bad interactions with black, you can put body cameras on us, and we did, and you can do civilian review boards, which we did, and you can do implicit bias training, which we did. But so long as you are sending us to enforce drug use in one neighborhood and not drug use in the other, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. So we listened to law enforcement officers. The district attorney is the chair of this plan that calls for safe injection facilities, for the study of heroin maintenance therapy, for far more, for the LEAD program, law enforcement assisted diversion. And we know that our plan, the Ithaca plan, if scaled and brought to the rest of the country, will end the drug war. And it will make people healthier. But it will not by itself, and I just feel the need to say this, We cannot achieve racial justice until we end the drug war. But ending the drug war alone won't achieve racial justice.
Yes.
I mean, we need to find similar fixes to what ails us in the transportation policy that disproportionately marginalizes black communities and brown communities. We need to fix the education arena. We need to fix our economic development strategies. All of those policies are also racially biased. So we cannot expect to achieve racial justice by ending the drug war, but we cannot achieve racial justice without ending the drug war.
I don't know what it's.
No, you're fine. You know. Okay. So, Carl, I think what would be great to hear from you is, you know, Mayor Myrick is a mayor. He's an elected official. And so in this time, we're having lots of conversation about elected officials and their roles and them taking responsibility and apologizing. There are limits to being an elected official, and there are limits to what they can say. There are things that they have to say. And so part of the conversation is like, what is their role and how do we push back on the kind of limitations that they have, and figuring out how do we actually get to real reform, because politicians are never gonna save us.
I'm sitting right here. I'm sitting.
You can also tweet that.
For anybody who knows me, you know that some of my least favorite people are politicians. But hang on, you know, Brother Svante, you are here, you with us. And there are some politicians who are trying to actually do the right thing. And, you know, mad respect to Brother Svante for trying to do those sorts of things. But we would be naive to think that politicians are going to solve this problem, in part because politicians do what the population want them to do, otherwise they won't be in office. In our population, in the United States, it's comfortable arresting black and brown people for drugs. I mean, that's just who we are. And if we don't own it, I mean, like here we're saying that we know our drug policies is racist. The drug policies are not racist. Policies are simple policies. I mean, it's the carrying out of the policies, the application of the policies that lead to racial discrimination, not racial bias, not racial disparities. Oftentimes we like to soften the blow. It's racial discrimination. Racial disparity, it's like black people like to smoke Newports more than white people. That's racial disparity. That's not racial discrimination. Racial discrimination is what is going on. And we know it. But one of the things that I think that it's very important that the mayor just said is that as we think about our country and our predilection for racial discrimination, it's not limited to the drug war. And in fact, the Obama administration said the drug war is over. He said that a long time ago. They have learned to co-opt the language of the progressive. That's what they do. And when you look at the actions of these administrations, even administrations we voted for, they are fucking us. Administrations that we voted for. And we are ambivalent about criticizing those administrations because there's a black face. Don't be ambivalent, because my children pay the price. Your children will pay the price. So don't be ambivalent for criticizing those folks who are continuing to participate in the subjugation of my children. Doesn't matter what face they have. So as we move forward, we need to understand that it's not about the drug war. It's about American racism that has been exported abroad. The brothers and sisters from Brazil, they understand this. Throughout the world, they understand this. Yeah. And so as we have this conversation, also I want to make sure that we are careful. We oftentimes talk about drug users. But the drug users that we're talking about are the pathological drug users. I'm a drug user. I'm not a pathological drug user. I go to work, I take care of my bills, I do all the rest of those sorts of things. But when you are talking about drug users, you're talking about that person that you can feel good about helping, and you feel good about yourself. But that's not the majority of drug users. The majority of drug users look like me. Not that I'm black, but they have a job. They have a job. They take care of their responsibilities. That's the majority of the drug user. And so please do not simply frame this issue to focus on just the pathological people. They need our help, of course. But that's not the drug user. I'm the drug user. Yeah.
I think you both did some really interesting things, so I'm gonna just close the questions I thought I had. So when we're talking about limitations, we're talking about being really specific about definitions, because people tend to throw terms around often, and that kind of inspecificity, I just made that word up, in not being specific, we miss so much. And Carl, you just brought up the fact that everyone's talking about the drug war being racist. That language, that framework has been co-opted by a lot of progressives, by a lot of liberals. And yet it still misses so much. And so in this room of so many people who I'm making the assumption that would consider themselves part of the progressive space, how do we challenge each other in this room to be very specific about how race discrimination, as you put it, is working?
Yeah, that's a great question. All right, as we think about the opioid situation in the United States today, heroin and prescription opioids, people are losing their mind. They're talking about this epidemic. That's not an epidemic, by the way, and we can get into that, why it's not an epidemic. It's simple. Heroin use has always been lower than things like marijuana, cocaine, all the rest of these drugs, and right now it's far lower than those drug use. But that's a whole other issue. But as we lose our mind in the United States today about this issue, the president and other folks have now just, for example, allocated a tremendous amount of money to focus on treatment. The vast majority of people who use drugs like heroin, including me, the vast majority of people who use those drugs don't need treatment. What are we talking about? But it's so much easier to say, I am not for incarcerating these people, I am for treatment. That way, we don't have to deal with the real issues. Yes. And when we think about that drug, for example, the real issues, my real concerns as a public health official, I'm worried about people overdosing from opioids. That's a real concern. If we're concerned about opioid overdose, we know that 75% or more die because they combine the drug with another drug. Where is the massive public health educational campaign to say, if you're going to use this drug, don't combine it with another sedative like alcohol or benzodiazepine? That's a real concern. Another concern that I have as a public health official, I'm concerned about adulterants in drugs. I'm concerned that drugs like opiates, for example, might contain fentanyl. Fentanyl is a more potent opioid. Now, why a dealer would put fentanyl in their opioid without charging you more, I don't know. But we can talk about that. We can talk about that. But let's get back to the issue of, if we're concerned about the real issues people potentially face as public health officials, why not make sure our law enforcement test all of the opioids that are confiscated from the streets and warn the local community in the way that we do, like Amber Alerts and the rest of these sorts of things? to make sure that folks understand that this particular heroin is tainted. Why aren't we having a conversation about drug legal regulation if we're concerned about quality? And I am as a public health official. So do not allow folks to have you all fall for the okie doke, like the progressives have been doing. The progressives have co-opted the language. The progressives have said, I'm for treatment, not jail, when the vast majority of us don't need either.
Or the vast majority of us don't get it, right? And so part of the conversation also is in the conversation when we're talking about treatment, people don't recognize often, or it's not really raised in conversation, that communities of colors have less access to treatment. And if we have access to treatment, we only have one kind of treatment. When we talk about heroin specifically, we know that medication-assisted treatment is very effective. And we also know that buprenorphine is, like, black people can't even get buprenorphine prescription. Like 90% of the buprenorphine prescriptions are white people. And we're lacking the conversation about how, when we're talking about drug policy and we're talking about treatment, the other reason why people want you in treatment is because they can tell you what to do when you're in treatment. So we've never moved outside of the social control, right? And so let's make sure that we're not just shifting the cookie in the cookie jar. The problem is that we need to destroy this cookie jar and us being the cookies. And so, Svante, can you talk about that?
Yeah.
Moderator.
No, just absorbing. I think I think where we get stuck and where politicians especially get stuck is in the moralizing and instead of problem solving. And whenever you hear your elected official begin to moralize, watch out, because it means they don't have any answers, but they're going to tell you about their values. And one of the values that we're stuck on, which is why we keep saying, well, treatment, is that we're still convinced that sobriety is the goal, which is, there's an intuitive common sense to that. That's why we've been stuck on it for so long. It's like sobriety is the goal. And especially for the AA crowd, like that is one of the pillars of that institution. But what if you shifted the goal and said instead that your goal is health, is to have a community that is as healthy as it can possibly be? And that for a lot of people, health will require sobriety. But for a lot of people, health will require drugs, right? And maybe it's not right. And maybe it's not exactly the drug they're using now. Right? Maybe instead of Jack Daniels, they actually need Valium. Right? Maybe they need Xanax instead of marijuana, or maybe they need marijuana instead of Xanax. But you can get sober and not be healthy. If you know any dry drunks, or if you know this term, or if you know any people who are anxious, depressed, angry, high blood pressure, but they abstain from everything, well, you know that they are not healthy, and that their relationships with their loved ones are not healthy either. And that if we can instead get them into an environment where treatment is, instead of saying, okay, this is what treatment is, we are going to get you off every drug that you use. If instead treatment was, well, let's figure out if you need some drugs, if so, how much, what kind, with what regularity, and how we're going to make sure that you can trust the place that you're getting it from. I can't tell you how many seniors, I have in Ithaca, and if you've ever been, then you'll understand that in Ithaca, I'll have more often like small older women come up to me and say, I'm very worried because I have no idea what my pot dealer puts in the marijuana. Is there anything I can do about that? And I have to tell like a woman who looks like my grandma, like, no, actually, we don't have any. We can regulate what's in your milk. We can figure out if the meat has been spoiled in the grocery store. But if whatever symptoms you're dealing with, there's no way that I can do a purity test for you. So until our politics gets away from sobriety as the goal and begins thinking about this as a health objective, we're going to be stuck saying, well, let's just funnel billions and billions and billions into rehab instead of preventative care. Like our health officials kept telling us when we were crafting this plan, they were like, you know that this is a health problem. You know that opiates is a health problem because in the final stage, when somebody's overdosing, you put them in an ambulance and take them to the hospital. Like that's what you do when someone has a health problem, is you call an ambulance. He said, but it doesn't matter what the health problem is. If you wait to start treating it until you need an ambulance ride to the hospital, if it's diabetes or if it's high blood pressure, if it's anything, if you wait until you need an ambulance ride to the hospital, you've waited too long. And that you can do preventative care, primary care, get people in to see doctors. This is why safe injection is so great. You get people out of the dark and into the light, and even if they're continuing to use, you can help them solve the other healthcare issues without stigma, so that even if they use for the rest of their life, they can still be healthy and contributing members of society.
I just want to be careful about the frame of the health problem, or this is a health issue. For most of us, it's not. It is a health issue for people who have problems. But if we think of it purely as a health issue, it keeps us in that narrow frame of the pathological user. And the vast majority of people are not in that frame. When we think about driving an automobile, there are some of us who pathologically have problems with driving. And that becomes a health concern. But for the vast majority of us, it's not a health issue. And so we have to make sure that we are careful in our language, because our language oftentimes traps us into these horrible solutions.
And so I would say that we're going to go to the audience, but one thing that I think is really important to say is one of the biggest health issues that we have in this country is the disease of institutional racism. And so when we're talking about the treatment for that, and we're talking like we are all pathologically in problems.
Well, when we use terms like institutional racism and those sorts of things, I think it's critically important, particularly in these spaces, to define it and be as specific as possible, because otherwise we start talking in this language like whiteness and white supremacy and all of these sorts of things, and people don't know what it looks like, you know. And I think that it's important for us to say precisely what it looks. For example, I'll just give you guys an example. One of the things we are here in New York this week for UNGAS. This is the big global drug meeting.
Yes.
We are really comfortable talking about or pushing for drug legalization because of our concern about the violence in the drug markets, cartels and those sorts of things. We are less comfortable talking about my children, the likelihood of my kid being Marley Graham, this kid in the Bronx who was shot in his bathroom because they thought he was selling marijuana. That happens at disproportionately high rates in black and brown communities.
Yes.
Institutional racism that we, as organizations, don't make that priority. Why is it that priority? That's priority to me. I don't give a fuck about the violence in the drug markets when I have my children who can't go in their home because they're afraid of the police. Institutional racism, that's priority.
Yes.
Yeah. And and I'll just add that one way this plays out at a local level, if you want to get very specific, is, you know, for and we made marijuana enforcement the lowest level priority in the city, which is the as far as you can go on a local level to decriminalize. But before we did that, we would not arrest people who smoke marijuana. We would arrest people who smoke marijuana outside on the sidewalk. And who smokes marijuana outside on the sidewalk? Well, people who don't have big back yards, so they can like sit in their hammock. People who don't have, just come to Ithaca, yeah, you'll get it. And people who don't have, 6 rooms in their house where they can go if somebody that they live with doesn't want to smell the smoke, so they can go upstairs and then go into the back room. We don't, if we actually arrested people who use marijuana, we would be kicking down the doors of senior facilities. We would be going into all the fraternity houses and sorority houses. We would be finding the young urban professionals in their apartment buildings. But instead, the cops only arrest the people that they see on the sidewalks and on the corners. And why are we standing on the sidewalks and on the corners? Because, as Deborah Smalls pointed out to me, it's because our parents did not have the opportunity to compete against the parents of white folks, and their parents did not have the opportunity to compete against their parents, right, for college, for jobs, for housing. So the legacy in this country, 400 years of discrimination has left us without a place to do the things that people do in privacy and security and comfort. So when we attempt to do those things in the only spaces that are left to us on street corners, we get swept up. So that's what discrimination in a drug policy at a local level looks like, and how it is tied both to race and class.
Thank you so much for that, Kassandra. Dr. Paul,
My name is Dean Becker on Drug Truth Network. I work in Houston. I'm working with the sheriff, the police chief, the district attorney, the mayor. I was ready to start a lead program, and they all got reelected or kicked out of office. And my question revolves around this. Most of our politicians know the truth of this matter, and yet they are afraid to talk about it, even amongst themselves. And if they were to do so, perhaps it would create progress. And I want you to address the disconnect there, please.
Sure. Yeah, that's very real. There are a lot of reformers in office who are in the closet, and they are, I can't tell you how many phone calls I got from mayors from around the country who said, bless what you're doing, send me as much information as you can. I think it's a great idea. I have no idea if I can get away with it in my community. And for folks like that, I'll be honest with you, I only got away with it because my community was insisting on it. They said that we need new answers, and we won't be satisfied with the same sermon. So deliver something better, and we did. So the only advice I can give, and in Houston it's more difficult than in Ithaca, or as we call it, the People's Republic of Ithaca, is to praise them, thank them when they do something good, make sure they know that you are watching and you appreciate it, and punish them when they don't. Make sure you were watching then too, and find ways to. There's not an elected official in this country who is not reading every comment on their Facebook page. They will tell you that they are not, but they are, and they read everything you tweet at them too, and they search their own names, every one of them. So know that and use that, and that's a way to reach folks without going through all of their aides and staff.
So, Myrick, thank you for being here. Your plan is incredibly bold, incredibly radical. It's a wonderful thing. The question is, what kind of stuff can you actually implement on the local level?
Sure.
What can you do by yourselves? What have been the reaction of your fellow mayors from around New York State?
Yeah.
And what parts of the program do the state and federal government
Multiple questions.
have to sign off to implement the plan?
Keep it
Let
moving.
me just do this. Let me just stack some questions here so we can just get
Okay.
a few more in the room. Jazz?
First of all, I want
Just to ask the questions.
this is in preference. Politicians are not the problem, right? If we all agree that government is the organized power of the ruling class, then that's the problem, right? There are 45.7 million African Americans in this country, 54 million Latinos. I don't know how many Indians and progressive whites. If we are going to talk about solutions, then the solution is how do we organize this group?
Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm going to stack all the questions and ask you to capsule them so we can get as many in the room as possible. Justin?
Peace, peace. I'm Justin from Colorado. My question is for Dr. Hart. Little simple, and I'm relatively new to the policy, and I'm new to the conversation. Is there a possibility when we're talking about the intersection of racial justice and institutionalization, you mentioned language, and language matters. Are we having a conversation about the drug war being successful?
Yeah.
Thank you, Justin. So, but why don't we take those 3 questions and then I'll stack another 3, okay?
Sure, and I'll go real fast. So the Ithaca Plan, if you haven't had a chance to read it, just Google Ithaca Plan, 65 pages, 25 recommendations around 4 pillars. If you're familiar with Vancouver's approach from a decade ago, it will look familiar. Of those 25 recommendations, 24 can be done on a local level immediately, and we're already moving the ball forward on those. The 25th is safe injection. For that, we need approval from New York State. And Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal, I've never met and don't know before, read about the plan. She endorsed it. She's going to introduce a bill that would legalize safe injection. So when you're talking about elected officials who you want to give props to when they're doing something right, Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal from the Upper West Side.
Jazz's question about organizing various groups. Various groups don't have the same interests. For example, the Cubans in Miami don't really care about this issue, whereas the Mexicans in California do. And so, but they're all classified as Hispanics, and so that'd be naive to think that they have the same interests and that we classify them similarly. And so I think about, well, as Americans, it's our responsibility to embarrass them when we don't take care of the rest our other citizens. So those folks who we're not organized, we must embarrass them. That brings me to the point of whether the drug war is successful. The drug war that's not even a question. Of course it's successful. That's why it continues. There are so many people making so much money, and we need to call them out. I mean, these people, it's not that they're not moving so much because they hate you. They're making a lot of money and they don't care about you. They're apathetic towards you. That's where it's happening. And we need to embarrass them. And if we don't embarrass them, it's going to continue to happen.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Svante. We're going to stack the next 3 questions.
Hi, my name is Svante from Brazil.
Welcome.
You read my t-shirts? I translate for hypocrisy. The war on drugs kill black people every day. Yeah. I saw a campaign in Brazil and I talked about this. And I asked this question for Hart in Brazil, and some months ago, some people thought that war on drugs is a failure because these people think that the war on drugs is to control the market of the substance, not to control people. So if we think that the war on drugs, the real objective of the war on drugs is control stigmatized people and control poor communities, it's a very success. That's the narrative. We are talking about this in Brazil. I am an organizer of a project that called Black Initiative for a Leader Policy, and we present a letter here this week with 40 black organizations that talk about this, the most important black organization that are working with us to talk to everyone that in Brazil we have 6,000 people dies in the world because in a year because they were on drugs. So it's a great success to the Brazil's racism.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's always racist.
Thank you. Let me try to have literally 3 minutes. So let me try to get 3 questions or 4 questions in very, very quickly. So just very quickly, 30 seconds.
Right. Also from the Brazilian Platform on Drugs. Aldo Zaiden, my name. I heard you were talking about this problem of health issues and law enforcement issues. We managed to build a narrative on, okay, it's not very easy for us to elaborate in English, so help me. Help me. Just 1 second. So we got to a very nice position that may help every movement to go beyond this So drug is a health issue. Health is not sanitary or treatment. Yes. If you go back to our the World Health Organization Declaration or Constitution in 1946, they say health is not the opposite of disease, but a state of of physical well-being, psycho and social well-being. And when we get to social well-being, we're talking about housing, work, jobs, and cities. And
right on. So what's
so when we get to this point, we're talking about how beyond sobriety we can achieve.
Right.
Come on, get to. How can we establish a new narrative on health, talking about social and housing in our movements?
Right on.
At least one woman on the mic.
Yes.
I'm Professor.
Hey.
Sorry.
I have a question for Mayor Myrick. So you talked about preventative care rather than just focusing on treatment, and I think that's really wonderful. My only question is, how's that different from sobriety?
Right.
But, that's it.
Sure.
That was a quick question.
And a good one.
Like, good question.
So if you want to take those last couple of questions and we'll get yours too, and then we'll stop there.
I'll take that last. It was a wonderful question.
She's a Columbia student.
Oh, is that why? I thought we'll get you into Cornell next time.
Yes. Tweet that.
So how is that different than sobriety? What that means is that when somebody is at 13 years old showing signs of anxiety or depression, you can actually get them in to see a doctor so they can come up with ways of coping with that anxiety that work for them. And maybe that is medication, so maybe that is drugs, and maybe it's counseling, or maybe it's something else. But if you don't get them in to see a doctor, they will walk through the world anxious until they go to a party where somebody hands them a thing. It could be a joint, it could be a drink, it could be a pill, it could be whatever. And if for the first time in a long time they don't feel anxious anymore, they will keep chasing that. They will follow that down. And it's likely possible, because we're not doctors, that they will have chosen the wrong medication for their particular state. And because they're not doctors, they won't know the right dose to use. So they could be using Jack Daniels to treat their anxiety for the rest of their life. That is not healthy or sober. But if we get them in to see a doctor and they take one Xanax every morning for the rest of their life, that's not sober, but it's far more healthy.
Thank you.
I just have to ask, you gave that example twice. Are you getting money from the company that produced Xanax? No.
Well, no, the reason it's funny, it's because the reason I use that is that that was the moment when I knew that we did not arrest drug users, that we only arrested poor drug users. Because wealthy drug users, they'll have in their purse or in their car, they'll carry a big pill of drugs, and they'll be pulled over, and the cop's like, "What's this?" And they go, "Xanax," and the cop goes, "Oh, okay," and hands it right back to him, right? And so it's just, I think that example stuck with me. For some people, Xanax is very bad for them, but marijuana would work far better.
Thank you. So the last two questions real quick.
So I want to take the speakers. It was a really good talk, very instructive. I want to make a point regarding education and scientific integrity in drug policy and what we're teaching at schools, and also in the media. We're teaching a lot of myths about drugs, and the narrative was just don't use drugs, and we try to generalize. Yeah, they try to generalize drugs as if they were all the same, and just a lot of misinformation. How can we incorporate scientific integrity and research-based evidence in our classrooms and also in policy, because marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug alongside LSD and other types of drugs used. What kind of, in terms of policy making, what are we doing and what can we do in order to make this
the right
more
question.
Honest process?
Last word. I'm a member of the Progressive Labor Party, and I just want to make a statement, which you can respond to this question. I think, ultimately, I think the point is that capitalism cannot survive without racism, the differentials in wages alone are a quarter of the GNP, and the separation between us is lethal and weakens us all from fighting back and worsens all our conditions. So I think the point is that although the war on drugs is an element of this, what we really need is multiracial unity, mass action, and not relying on voting to change our situation.
So I will answer the last. Okay, the question about drug myths and what do we do to enhance the quality of drug information we get in our educational system. The thing that we all have to recognize is, because the comment said something about evidence-based or research-based. Even if we think about research-based information, the vast majority of the research produced in this area around the world is funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse from the United States. And their mission is to focus primarily on these harmful or negative effects related to drugs. And so what that means is what you get published in the scientific literature focuses primarily on pathology. Now, that's an inappropriate and disproportionate focus on pathology because the vast majority of things that happen with drugs are not pathological. So what gets published in the scientific literature is biased. What gets published in the textbooks are taken from the scientific literature. That's biased. And then what gets published in the newspapers. So even that stuff is biased. That's why I wrote High Price. That's why I teach out here. That's why we have this public educational campaign.
Join me in thanking Let's